Hello, and welcome back to the Book Love Podcast, where we dive into and beyond the pages in front of us. I'm your host, Matt from Ohio, and today I'm joined by author Audrey Ingram. An Alabama native and former Washington, D.C. lawyer, Audrey is the author of 3 novels, The River Runs South, The Group Trip, and The Summer We Ran. When she's not writing, Audrey can be found digging in her garden or hiking the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, where she lives with her husband and 3 children. Audrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
How are you on this lovely Tuesday morning?
You know, we had a little surprise snowstorm here in Virginia. So it's been, this lovely morning. I'm definitely looking forward to spring weather coming soon, but it's a good morning.
Yeah, we got the snow yesterday too, and I'm done with the 60 degrees to 2 days ago, the 20 degrees today. I just want nice and steady spring.
Yeah, it's some mood swings with Mother Nature right now.
But up here in Ohio, we certainly did not get we got the same snowstorm you guys did a few weeks back, but we didn't have the ice problem afterwards. That seemed horrendous.
It was wild. Yeah, we've had a bumpy winter, but can't complain too much.
And winters are typically pretty mild down there, yeah?
Yeah, every once in a while we get one of these like good snowstorms, which is nice. I'm originally from Alabama, so we never had this growing up, and I enjoy it. But I'm a summer girl. I like the warm weather, so I'm looking forward to that.
I hear you. I love Virginia. And speaking of Virginia, it's where I first encountered you.
Yes,
You
in
were a
Crozet.
panelist on the romance book session in
Yeah.
Crozet. And I was sitting with my wife and my sister-in-law, and we were like all about The Summer We Ran, and we threw it on our TBRs, and just like you had perfect timing with what happened with the political everything in Virginia. I'm sure that was pretty fortuitous, but
Yeah, it's always so funny because timelines in publishing are very long, and so I started working on that book. Gosh, it's been 5 years now, and so I could have never predicted, but I was struck by the fact that we've never had a female governor in Virginia before,
mhm.
and the idea of that happening, and then for the book to be coming out at a time when we did elect our first female governor was very exciting.
Pipe dream turned into reality. That's
Yeah.
pretty. I think we can all give you a nod of respect and a nod of thanks for manifesting. Um, it felt like forever to me, but it was apparently only 2 months, and I just voraciously consumed all 3 of your books in the nice snowy weather. And then my wife stole them from me, and she read all 3 of them, and we've been sitting around uh, talking about them. And but imagine my surprise when I discovered that I was not, and here comes the discussion, right? I was not reading romance novels.
So it's such an interesting topic, this idea of what is a romance novel and what isn't, because the whole point of these categories is that you find the right reader, and so that is always my goal. So if someone calls my books romance novels and that's how they found them, then I'm thrilled about that. If they found it in the commercial fiction section of their bookstore, their library, then I'm thrilled about that. I think it's all about the ways that a writer can connect with the readers who
Mhm.
will appreciate their story. And there are a lot of different paths for that. But my books often do kind of straddle those genres, which can make it harder for readers to find because there's always a love story component to it. But, um, you know, romance novels, which I have so much respect for, traditional romance novels, they follow a certain format, which I sometimes deviate from. I play, or I like to say, I play around with those kind of that formula a little bit. So it doesn't always neatly fit into that box of what a traditional romance novel is.
For sure. Like, yeah, I did not pick up your books thinking that I was going to have some, throwaway flirty thing, but I wasn't expecting what I would think are some pretty hard hitting topics. Some of them are a little bit more tangible, but some of them are very abstract. Um, like across all three of them, some of the things that I can remember, the straightforward, tangible ones are a little bit more like grief, loss,
Mhm.
maybe some teenage pregnancy, but like then some of the more abstract ones, you dive into identity discovery and formation pretty hard. It's classism, environmental responsibility, and like you were saying, you're all over the genres. I think what I have found as a reader, I appreciate the novels that do not adhere to a single genre more than the ones that do.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess when you think about yourself, because you're just happy when people read, but when you think about yourself in your own identity, do you consider yourself to be a romance novelist or something else, or are we getting into labels are bad?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think I consider myself a writer, and I'm, happy, like you said, when someone reads the books. What you mentioned about, a lighthearted romance, not addressing heavy topics, I think is so interesting because I think a lot of people share that view, but I think people who read deeply in the genre know that figuring out who you are, what kind of love you need, what kind of love you deserve, oftentimes explores a lot of very heavy topics about identity and your past and coming to terms with who you are and what you want in life. I think a lot of times there are certainly romance books that stay in a lighter zone, and I think a lot of readers want that safe place, but a lot of romance novels really do dig into some very deep topics because, you know, figuring out love and life are some of the most
Mhm,
important questions that you're ever going to ask yourself. And so I think that those expectations that readers have coming into romance are something that we're all as authors kind of grappling with. So, there are sometimes like things like if you see, covers do a great job of helping a reader guide a reader there, right? Like if I see kind of two illustrated characters on the front, sometimes people call them more like of a cartoon style illustration. I tend to think that that's going to have a lighter touch to it. That's not to say that there won't be heavier topics addressed, but I tend to think that the author will probably have a lighter touch. Whereas there are romances that have, when I was working with my publisher, I really did want to avoid those kind of more illustrated versions because I didn't want readers to come in with the wrong expectations. Managing those expectations at the beginning of a reading experience is really important. It's like if you walked into an Italian restaurant and you got served tacos, they might be the most delicious tacos you've ever eaten, but it's not what you wanted. And so those expectations are really important.
I think speaking of your covers, this is I'm going off topic for a second, but, um, they're not drawn, but they're not graphic art either. I think you did a very well, or your publisher did a very beautiful job of almost making, like, paintings.
Mhm.
Um, I would if you just take the words, the title, and your name off of them, throw that on the wall, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Very, very lovely.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think place is also so important to me. It's like the setting is a character to me. And that was something that all three of the covers of my novels really convey the place where those books are set. And that
yes.
hopefully is an escape for the reader to really dive into just this whole different world. And I think that's something I really enjoy when I'm reading books. And that's something that I hope readers share as well when they're reading my novels.
Do you think that, you were talking about the expectations, uh, between I'm gonna go ahead and kind of talk about this as realistic romance and fantasy romance, not fantasy like trolls and fairies, but, our fantasy is what we want, our desires. Is that sort of the biggest expectation you find readers to have? Maybe the biggest misconception you find readers to have? Do you have to actually grapple with that much? Or are we having a semantical conversation?
No, I don't think it's magical. I think there are a lot of expectations, I think, especially among romance readers who are the most voracious readership out there. There are, expectations about how much of the actual kind of like physical intimacy is going to be on the page. That's a big expectation that
Okay.
readers have. They want to know, how kind of there are lots of different kind of verbiage that's used, like, is it the spice scale, open door versus closed door? There's lots of kind of different things. That's an expectation that readers have going in. I think whether it's a romantic comedy or a romantic dramedy, I think there are expectations about that. Sometimes just characterizing it as a love story instead of a romance. There is not typically in a library or a bookstore a love story section, but if I were going to describe my books to people, I would say they're love stories, which I think more accurately describes that it is not going to be a romantic comedy like you would expect from the 1990s. But the relationship between two people, them figuring out themselves and then figuring out their relationship together is going to be at the center of the plot of the book.
Really like that distinction between love story and romance. That is so meaningful. That is I like that a lot. I'm internalizing that and using it forever. Um, your I Something I was struck by your 3 novels, getting back to them and off the topic of genres, right? Because this is about you and the books that I love, that we all love. They are very diverse from one another.
Yeah.
Um, but they each have depth. They're poignant in their own ways, but yet somehow you still have your through line of things you care about, your writing voice and your tone. Do you find that difficult to tell completely different stories with very different characters while still everything is almost sort of the same over on this side? It's like there's always a through line from you.
Such an interesting question. So I find it very easy to just tell the story that's in my heart. I think to tell a similar story in a different way would be incredibly difficult to me. So there are some authors that I think have done it masterfully. So when I think of someone like Ellen Hildebrand, who has written books set on Nantucket on an island dealing with very similar themes. Now she kind of plays the genre a little bit, but she has essentially written, you know, variations of books that feel very fresh but are the same thing. You know that brand very quickly, 30 different times. That to me is very difficult to do and to do well, and I think she has done it. For me, my books are very different. I think I have a similar voice throughout them all, but
Mhm.
they're even written in different points of view. My first 2
Yes.
novels were written in third point of view. My last novel, The Summer We Ran, was written in the first point of view. Some of them have multiple timelines, some of them don't. Some of them have multiple points of view, some of them don't. Even kind of the structure of my books has shifted. And for me, it is, I think about what is the story I need to tell. Writing has always been the way that I process the world around me, and so I think about that, and then I start thinking about what is the best vehicle for telling that story, and it has shifted throughout each one, and so I've been so lucky, like your kind words and your wife's kind words, that there have been readers who kinda have followed me along this writing journey, and that for that, I'm so grateful because I think my stories will always feel a little bit different.
But they feel very different. Thinking about the how you play with temporality and you play with perspective. Has that been, an evolution of yours? Or have those been conscious decisions to try to do something different, to try to push yourself? Or, like you were saying before, is that just the story that comes out of you? There is no thought behind it. It just is because it's in your heart and your mind.
Me, I'm always trying to write the best book I can at this stage of my life. And I always am hoping that the next book I write is better than the last. And so my first book was written from the third person and a single point of view, and for me, it was like that was the book I could write, and then I wanted to stretch myself a little bit with the second one, and then stretch myself even further with the third one. So, yes, I think it is part of, kind of my journey and my growth as an author, um, but I'm equally as proud of all of them because they were the best thing I could have written at that point of time in my life.
Okay. When I'm curious how you write, multiple timelines because and multiple points of view because I'm just a dude. I've dabbled with writing from time to time over my life. Nobody cares. But what I have found is it is very difficult to write one story and then switch and write a completely different story. Because that's essentially what different timelines are, right? It's they're different stories. And it's hard to write one character because it's one voice way to describe the world, the words they use, and to switch and do another one.
Mhm.
So when you're writing, do you plot everything out and then write just one timeline, one character, and then go back and write another character and another timeline? Or are you able, my brain can't, but are you able to just sort of write the book?
So my last book, The Summer We Ran, it's told from um, two timelines and two characters' points of view. The summer that the male and female main character, the summer they meet as teenagers, and then the summer 25 years later when they reunite and they're both running for governor of Virginia. And so that book was really an iterative process where I wrote it and tore it apart, put it back together, wrote it again. It really evolved over time because I knew I wanted to tell a story from two very different people's perspective. But as I mentioned, my prior two books had both been written in the third point of view. This one, I knew how I wanted it to end, and I knew, and not to give anything away, but I knew it had to be told from the first point of view for it to work. And so that was a real stretch for me, and figuring out what that voice was, and then figuring out the voice written in the first person from a male point of view was also something that I really had to. I really had to play around with for a while and wait until it felt right. And like I said, I wrote that book through several times trying to figure out what was the structure gonna be. The timeline jumps from past to present were initially a very different structure, and it just didn't work. And I think that's part of being a writer is moving forward, realizing that you can fix it later. You gotta get it down, and then you know what to fix, and you keep going and going and going until it feels right. And if you're doing what you should be doing as a writer, and that's reading a lot, you have a sense of when you read a book and you know it works for you, you'll get that same sense with your own work as well. And you'll know it's not working, and you'll know you need to keep at it and try something new. Sometimes that can be a frustrating process. It feels like a lot of like lost productivity. But for me, I know that is part of the process, that I'm going to have to just keep at it until I know it feels right. And for that book, especially writing from the male point of view, finding some real deep connection points with that character were really important for me to actually figure out how to get into that voice. And once that happened, then I thought there's no way I can do this for a lot of reasons because this character is so different than me. Not only is he a man, but we couldn't be more opposite in so many ways. But when I was, going back over that, those were actually some of my favorite chapters that I wrote.
I was so when you're reading The Summer We Ran and you get like part one from Tessa's point of view, it's pretty easy to not like people. Grant and his mother, like they're likable, but also there's something just a little off.
Hmm.
But then in part two, when you get Grant's point of view, I really enjoyed talking about the points of connection that you were finding with him. You really feel for his mother. You really start to be sympathetic for Grant, and I think that makes the third part land so much harder. And it was a very drastic change from your first two books. They made the book feel a little bit more serious, and it made the book feel like it hit home more. Um,
Yeah, I think uh, if I were to kind of take a step back and look at my first two books, um, I stayed in a very kind of comfortable place with those characters, a very kind of escapist place. And I think with The Summer We Ran, that idea that you don't necessarily like people, but you need to connect with them, and what we do in our own lives with people that we don't always like, but we have empathy for, we connect with, and how we handle those relationships, I think is what makes us human. Like no
I
person in our real
like
lives
that.
do we like all the time. And it's figuring out how we handle those relationships. And for me, that was something that I really wanted to explore, and I think that discomfort doesn't work for some readers, and that's completely
Mm.
fine. But I think that was something that I needed to work through and understand, and it's been for the readers it does work for, I think it really works. So that's been rewarding.
something you just mentioned there. The first two books are kind of escapist. I would also like to add that in the summer we ran, more specifically in the flashbacks when it's the summer we dated, right? That really felt escapist. There
Yeah.
was still a huge sense of nostalgia, especially one of Grant's. I think one of his coping mechanisms, if you will, is he just blast Dave Matthews in his headphones, and I was just like, yes, I feel that. Um,
Yeah,
I
that
have to,
90s nostalgia is very fun to write.
and I guess '90s nostalgia is having a time in the sun right now. So also more fortuitous timing for you, eh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, is so as a former lawyer, you lived that big city grind, but a lot of your books have a through line of sort of desiring or promoting or glorifying the simple life, as it were.
Mhm. Yeah.
Is that maybe possibly something from you?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that's, I grew up in Alabama with a very simple life, and all I wanted more than anything was to move to a big city and have this big, like, glamorous, luxurious life, and I think as you get older, for me, especially once I had a family, those priorities and those goals really shifted, and it leaves you in this place of kind of figuring out, like, what are your core values? What really matters to you? And all of my books, I do think the characters are exploring that in very different ways. They're very different characters, but they're all kind of figuring out. And I think a lot of what romance does beautifully is it's a stripping away of um kind of the personas that we may put on for other people, finding that vulnerability. And hopefully, when you meet someone who, is deserving of your love, who you love in return, you can have that kind of stripping away that vulnerability of who you are. And I think that's true of a lot of life. You can kind of strip away a lot of the extraneous, and it is the core things that really matter and figuring those things out and then doubling down on them, like really leaning into what are the like simple, beautiful things in life that bring you joy and happiness and seeking out more of those.
Do you miss practicing law at all?
I miss the people, which I think people always laugh about. Like, I had great, smart, thoughtful colleagues, and I really enjoyed working with them. For me, though, this is a profession where I feel like I can just constantly grow. There is really no kind of end goal for me here. I just hope that my craft keeps getting better, my storytelling, my ability to connect with readers just keeps improving. Those are always my goals. And that to me is very exciting as kind of I'm entering this kind of second half of my life and thinking about where things can go and the possibility of that all. But I enjoyed practicing law. I was always a little girl who wanted to be a lawyer. That's what I wanted to do. Writing for me was just this like escape, and I kind of likened it to like being a pop star. Like I didn't think that was like a career that I could ever pursue. Like, that would be like, my daughter says she wants to be Taylor Swift, and I love her, and I think she's wonderful, and I think, "Yes, like, have those big dreams," but that was how it felt. That's how it would have felt for me to say I wanna be a writer growing up. I thought, being a lawyer was a practical career, it was one I could do, and so, now that I've gotten this opportunity, definitely gonna cling to it for as long as I can.
Um, I suppose something I could say that you can tell your daughter, as a 40-year-old man, I think I can wholeheartedly say we all want to be Taylor
Yes.
Swift.
Yeah. Same, same.
Um, okay, so writing and law are two very different things, but it's very clear that you have to be a little type A, organized, go get 'em to do both. S So in that way, they're the same, but I'm curious, does does writing provide something for you that law didn't or couldn't?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that you hear of a lot of people who are lawyers turned writers, and I think there is a work ethic thread through both careers that I think really serves them both well. anyone who thinks that you as a writer sit down and inspiration strikes you and you just pour out this book, it's like it's a lot of hard work. And I think that lawyers, you learn through law school and then especially at the beginning of your career how critical that work ethic is to success. And I think that has definitely served me well. But I've been a journaler my whole life.
Mm,
Whenever something was bothering me, like even today, I sat down and I jotted down a quick to-do list and like just writing it out just helps my brain process things. And so that's how I've always processed life. And now I get the time to kind of process bigger questions that I
mm,
have in a kind of more thoughtful, expanded package, which is very, very rewarding for me. And, I I I liked being a lawyer, but I could imagine myself doing dozens of different things in my life. And sometimes it felt like there's this, beautiful Mary Oliver poem, and I'm gonna misquote it, but the gist of it is like, what are you gonna do with your one wild and precious life? And I used to always think, you know, that scares me. We only have one wild and precious life, and I only get one shot of it. But with writing, almost feel like I get to live dozens of lives through my characters. I get to imagine what it would be like to be an artist. I get to imagine what it would be like to live in all of these different beautiful places, to explore these different jobs. And it is just wildly rewarding to imagine your life going a lot of different directions. And I am not the main character in many of my books, but you write about things that interest you and you explore that interest through your characters. And that to me is so wonderful.
you're not the main character in many of your books, but you're in. I'm taking the implication that you are in fact in. How is there any particular formula that you follow to insert yourself in, or does that happen organically? How do you
Well,
show up, or how do
yeah,
you
I
want to
think
say you show up?
obviously, like, I'm a human being living in the world, and I observe people, and I, have conversations with people, and that might spark an idea for a part of the story, and then I let my imagination run wild and, play with all of the different ways that could happen, and I think there are certain parts of me in every character that I ever write, because there's that human connection and that touch point. I think if you're listening to other people, if you're a good listener, then you're, part way to being a writer because that is, you know, experiencing life through different people's perspectives is so key. I think stories, one of the big themes that I wanted to explore in the summer we ran and what I believe in fiction is that stories are bridges. It's the way we connect with other people. And fiction, especially, has all of these like empathy building skills to it. When you're reading and really immersed for 300 pages in someone else's life, you get to imagine things that you wouldn't have otherwise. And so sometimes it's the characters are pieces of me, and then sometimes the characters are things that I don't understand and I want to try
Mm.
to figure it out. And so all of that is, figuring out life through stories.
And well, I suppose since you were talking about writing giving you the ability to live lots of lives, you were also recently on deadline. So, what other lives will you be leading? Can like what have you been working on? What should we all be keeping our eyes open for?
Yeah, so I have written 3 books in 3 years, but or published 3 books in 3 years. And so I will not have a book coming out this year in 2026, but my hope is that I will have one coming out in 2027 and hopefully can be sharing more about that soon. So until then, but it's, another genre straddling love story with some kind of secrets filled mystery and
Love it.
I've really enjoyed escaping into another world.
Well, since we're gonna all be on our toes, holding our breath for these details, where can everybody follow along, get in touch, and wait with bated breath?
I'm on Instagram at Audrey Ingram Writes, and my website is the same. And those are the two places where I tend to kind of stay the most active. I dabble in TikTok, but let's be
Yeah,
honest, I'm a woman in her 40s, so it's probably not the best place for me. But Instagram and my website are the best places to find me.
I feel that. I recently tried to get into the TikTok and I'm just too old. My brain won't. So I feel that.
Yeah.
Um, well, I do want to be cognizant of your time this morning. We're also very busy. And I thank you so much for taking some of your time to speak with me. It's a great honor of mine. Um, I would like to conclude with one more question, and it's a
Mhm.
little bit of a philosophical one,
Yeah.
which is kind of my thing, I guess. Uh, but I want to talk very specifically about the group trip for a moment. Um, Chloe mentions a story. It's not Luke; it's Luke's mother. Where I think, but Luke's telling her, or maybe it's a flashback where, but Luke's mom thinks there are two types of people in life, and the kind of quote from your book is the two people are quote the ones who create the art and always wonder if anyone likes it, and then the people who never have to wonder because they have the money to buy the art they like.
Mhm.
So the question is, after having written so many stories, interacted with so many fans and readers, worked in the industry, what have you come to understand about the relationship between the creation and the consumption of art?
Well, that's a big question. I think where the challenge is that there is so much crossover, especially when the art is books, because the people who are creating the art are both consumers of it and creators. We love to read. That's why we started writing. And so there has to be kind of natural separation in order for you to be able to protect your creativity. I firmly believe in there are reader spaces and writer spaces, but lots of times there's so much crossover there. And I think at the end of the day, I am I'm running a business to some extent, right? My books are a business, and I'm mindful of the consumers of that business. I wouldn't be a good business person if I wasn't. But in order to be kind of the artist and the creator, I have to stay true to the stories I know and the stories I believe in. And so there is a time where I have to kind of set aside those voices and just focus on my own. So I do, I try, especially when I'm in that first draft stage of a book, to really kind of protect my barriers, really listen, internalize myself and create the best thing I know. And then after I've done that, then I fling the doors open and I have my agent and my editor and I have beta readers and I listen to all the early feedback and I try to think, okay, how can I make this the best book? Not only that I could write, but that a reader could consume. You can't write for the broad audience. That's the beautiful thing about books is the specificity of them. If you tried to write something that pleased everyone, it would please no one. I'm very mindful of that. Um, but I do think that, you need those voices to come in, but I think they have to be at the right time. So it's always a constant playing, but I think reading and books, the connection between an author and their reader is so beautiful that I wouldn't wanna set up walls too high that I wouldn't get that because those have been some of the most rewarding experiences for me as an author. So it's a dance.
Love it. I love it because some of the most rewarding experiences for me as a reader has been being able to meet and talk to and pick the brains of the amazing people that have created the things that have enriched my life. So wonderful that your walls are short.
Yeah.
um, and I suppose that on that note, wonderful stopping point. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for everybody that has listened. And I sincerely hope that when your next novel graces the world, we might be able to do this again.
I would love that, and thank you guys so much for reading and reading all of them. I'm, like, blown away by it, so thank you so much. This has been a really joyful conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so I guess if anybody out in the world of things would like to keep in touch, feel free to leave a comment, send either of us an email or a DM. I will have both of our contact informations down in the description below. And until next time, cheers.
Great. Thank you.